Hi there, Henry from 911virgin, the Porsche people in Uxbridge. Welcome to another video. This has just come in and couldn't not make a video on it. What is it? It's a 993 Turbo S. So, first of all, if you're relatively new to Porsches, you're thinking it's not a 993, it's a 911. The problem with Porsche 911s is everything essentially is a 911 Carrera from 1973 through to the current day, and so that you know what car you're talking about, you use the internal model codes. It's a bit anarchy, but there is genuinely a good reason for it. So you'd have a maybe 3.2 Carrera from the kind of 1980s, then you started using the model codes. So from 1989 you have the 964, and then for the 94 model year through to 98 you had these, and these were called 993s, and then after these came 996s. Now the 993, if you ask anybody and say what's the best 911, they're going to have different thoughts, different ideas, but it's pretty safe to say that in someone's top three or thereabouts, the 993 is going to feature. It is a really, really weird and unusual car. With cars, you go out and buy a new car and you pay a load of money for it, and it decreases in value, and then eventually there comes a point when it's kind of almost worthless and not, you know, it's not worth the cost of keeping it on the road, and they get scrapped. Then if you're lucky, after a few years they kind of come out the other end, but that few years might be 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, something like that. And then people suddenly start to get emotive. Oh, I had one of those in my youth, I want another one. And then classic car status kicks in and the cars start climbing out and become worth more money. The 993 is weird in so much as it attained classic status almost whilst it was still a current car. And there's a few reasons for that. When the Porsche 993 was introduced, the engineers kind of had total control of the company. They were the people that dictated the output that went out of the company. Everything was about the engineers making what they considered to be the best possible car, and all the kind of senior people were kind of engineers. The problem is they weren't making any money, and so they were going to go out of business. And so after this car came the Porsche 996, and Porsche got some guys in from Toyota and said, tell us how to make cars efficiently, and the accountants came in and said, right, okay, well, we're going to cost engineer everything down. You know, component has to be 10 millimeters, but could you do it 9 or 8 because there's a $7 unit saving on the component, and they saved some money. But whilst this was made, this was, I don't know, the pinnacle of kind of Porsche's engineering development. The more recent cars are good cars, you know, they're great cars, but these are kind of hewn out of granite. And also, this was the last of the air-cooled cars. So after this, the 996 became water-cooled. They did it for a number of reasons. It was for sound insulation and for emissions, noise-wise, and so on. But for those reasons, the 993 just, and it's a good-looking car. You know, it's a very sort of organically shaped car. It's got curves to it. It's got bulges, and so for all those reasons, the 993 just kind of hit the spot, and from almost day one was an iconic classic car. It's interesting that the car which followed the 996, so the one after this, the 997, starts to look more like the 993 again. The 996 generally wasn't at the time received particularly well as a car visually, and people didn't like the fact it was water cooled and too many changes. So but the 997 then looked a bit more like a 993, and they kind of liked them again. But this 993 as I say, as a model, really good. In terms of the evolution of the cars mechanically and driving and so on, you have your early cars, 63 to 89. They're in the kind of classic era. The 964 came out, first the modern cars, very, very different car in terms of different floor pan, ABS brakes, the power steering, the way it handled, very, very different to the earlier cars, but visually looked like a 3.2 Carrera with plastic bumpers. The 993 then took and evolved that mechanical development, but packaged it into a much more modern body, you know, nicer interior, more modern interior and so on. So it really did look like a new model, when really the big change probably happened in 89 with the 964. Within the 993 range, you could have two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, and in 1995 they introduced the 993 Turbo. So the 993 Turbo had kind of always been the pinnacle of road cars from Porsche's perspective. That was their kind of top of the tree for normal road use cars. You had track focus cars, so RS's, then in later times the GT series and so on. But the Turbo, when it came out, was going to be as good as it gets. Came out in 75, 76, the Turbo. They produced a Turbo 4-speed, initially 5-speed. They stopped it for a little while. Then when the 964 came out, they produced a turbo version of that. Again, another little break. When this came out in 94, there was a little bit of a break. And then in 95, Porsche produced the 993 Turbo. They used the Porsche 959 sort of drive chain technology in the Turbo. So it was a four-wheel drive car. It was a twin turbocharged car, so you got less turbo lag. Instead of one big turbo, two slightly smaller turbos, less lag and so on. And technologically, it was an incredible car. The early turbos that had come on before then, a bit of a handful to drive, particularly the early 930s. But with this 993, this thing was everyday usable. You know, really nice, the four-wheel drive, the chassis of it. The 993, they changed the rear suspension, went from multi-link rear suspension, which kind of made it a bit more stable, particularly the back end. And so the 993 Turbo, pretty special car. You know, supercar and a supercar as well. You know, it was a lovely, lovely thing. In 1998, just as these were finishing, Porsche produced, I think it was about 430, 440 993 Turbo S's. Tiny number. It was quite a big price premium to get hold of a Turbo S, and that's what this is. So this is a factory right-hand drive. I think there's less than 30 sold in the UK, and what it did, it took the 993 Turbo, it increased the power about 25 horsepower, took you to just under 450 horsepower by using larger turbos, changed the engine management system. There's a few changes as well. You'll see from the front end you've got additional air vent in here to allow cooling air to go to the brakes, and then also you'll see here in the rear quarter panel you've got a vent in there which allows cooling air to go through into the engine. Car dropped by about 15 millimeters, so slightly stiffer and lowered suspension. A few little bits and pieces. There was a sort of chrome finish wheel which you got with it. You got a load of sort of carbon fibre and bits and pieces, but it meant that this was in effect Porsche's sort of ultimate 993. And so given the popularity of the 993, there is an argument to say that this is kind of the ultimate Porsche. And so for that reason, these are a very, very sought after and collectible car. As I say, tiny numbers in terms of total numbers produced, and a really great car. So we've actually sold this in the past. It's the second time we've sold it, so we're quite familiar with it. A lot of them now going into collections. So this is this car will be bought by someone with a collection of cars, and it'll go in and be part of the collection. Having said that, you can still use these in anger. They're not something that kind of has to go into a museum and be polished, and you can drive this, and on the road it's a really lovely car to drive. So it's kind of nice in that it's almost like having a piece of art, but that you can use as well. But yeah, you don't see many of them about. From an aero point of view, by the way, the rear spoiler changed as well, so you've got a different rear spoiler on the back end compared to a standard 993 turbo. But yeah, not something you see a lot of, so wanted to make a little quick video of it, because it's, as I say, not something you see that often. Certainly in the UK there's less than 30 right-hand drive ones were sold in the UK, so quite a rare beast. But yeah, from our point of view, we are very lucky in terms of the cars we sell. We've such a broad church. We'll go from kind of 1970s and 80s cars through to pretty much current day, but we do a lot of 993s, 996s, 7s and so on, but we know the 993 very, very well, and so yeah, quite excited to have this in. So yeah, hopefully you found it interesting just to see a more unusual model, something you don't see every day. Yeah, hope you found it useful and interesting. If you've got any questions, check them in the comments, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. I don't profess to be the oracle of all knowledge, but having done it for a few years now, we're getting the hang of it. So yeah, my name's Henry. We're 911virgin. We're the Porsche people in Uxbridge. Many thanks for watching.